Hello everyone, this is QB. Today, I want to discuss a particular sense of unease I've been feeling while observing the ongoing Iran crisis. When you look at media coverage, you see a remarkably clean narrative structure. Iran's nuclear development is a threat and evil. America and Israel's preemptive strikes are self-defense and good. Khamenei is a tyrant representing evil, while liberating the Iranian people represents good. Iran blocking the Strait of Hormuz is evil, while Western powers seizing civilian ships in response is good. Does something feel off to you? Am I the only one sensing this disconnect? This framework seems almost too pristine. It's as if the villains and heroes have been predetermined in a way that even a schoolchild could understand. But anyone with even basic knowledge of geopolitics should recognize that real international relations are far from this simple. Every nation operates within its own historical context, geopolitical constraints, and economic rationalities. Iran has its logic. America has its logic. Israel has its logic. So why is the world consistently framed through such simplistic good versus evil dualism? Rather than having an old man like me explain the historical trajectory, let me have two AI voices walk us through this story.
That sense of unease QB mentioned, it is definitely there. Not just regarding the Iran war, but, well, where did this good versus evil dualism even come from in the first place? Let's travel back in history.
Yeah, it really is a massive question to unpack.
All right, so today's deep dive focuses on a really fascinating video transcript. Specifically, we are looking at Chapter 2 from our sources, exploring the surprising historical origins of the good versus evil framework.
And how an ancient moral teaching was essentially hijacked.
Exactly.
To really grasp how deep this goes, we have to look way, way back to the Achaemenid Persian Empire. So this is around the time of King Cyrus.
Okay, so we are talking ancient history here.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you looked at the civilizations surrounding them, like, say, Egypt, they were overwhelmingly polytheistic.
Right.
You know, they worshipped a multitude of nature gods. The rivers, the sun, the harvest, they all had their own chaotic, unpredictable deities.
Like river gods that could flood your crops out of nowhere.
Exactly.
Right.
But then Zoroaster comes along and introduces a completely radical concept to the region.
Which is this strict, absolute dualism of good versus evil.
Right. It was a massive, massive shift.
I mean, going from hundreds of unpredictable nature gods to a strict binary of good and evil, why make that change? Like, what was the actual benefit to the people living at that time?
Well, it really comes down to the mechanics of a developing agricultural society.
Okay, how so?
When you are transitioning from smaller nomadic tribes into massive settled farming communities, you desperately need order.
Because farming requires, coordination.
Yes, strict attention to seasons, predictability, and just immense community trust. And Zoroaster's dualism mapped perfectly onto this.
Oh, I see.
Order and cooperation became defined as absolute good, while the chaos of the wild, or reverting to barbaric destructive practices, was framed as absolute evil.
Okay, let's unpack this. So instead of praying to a river god, this was more like a practical rule book, a moral framework perfectly suited for a settled agricultural society.
You hit the nail on the head. It was a behavioral framework designed to program cooperation into large groups of people.
So they wouldn't just tear each other apart.
Right. And it was so effective as a civilizing tool that King Cyrus heavily encouraged it. I mean, he even adopted this dualistic framework specifically for the education of the royal court's children.
Wow. Okay. But I have to ask, so what does this all mean? How did a peaceful, practical, moral guide for farmers transform into the rigid political weapon we see today?
Well, the ideas bled out over centuries. You know, as empires expanded and traded, that philosophical software code seeped into the cultural groundwater.
Eventually hitting the Roman Empire, I'm guessing?
Exactly. But the actual historical pivot, the precise moment the code was hacked and weaponized, happens at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD.
Wait, but Nicaea was a Christian council convened by a Roman emperor? What does that have to do with Zoroastrian dualism?
This is where the mechanisms of power really take over. At Nicaea, the Athanasian faction was trying to establish their concept of the Trinity as the absolute mainstream doctrine.
And to do that, they needed to consolidate control.
Right, they needed to eliminate competing Christian factions.
Yeah.
So they essentially adopted that ancient dualistic framework.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they didn't just disagree with other interpretations. They drew a hard binary line. You're either entirely orthodox,
Which they obviously aligned with absolute good and divine order.
exactly, or you were heretical, which was suddenly cast as absolute evil.
So they took a tool meant to help farmers cooperate and turned it into an exclusionary political weapon to crush their rivals.
They did. And then they locked that weapon into the state apparatus just a few decades later. By 392 AD, Emperor Theodosius made this specific, rigidly dualistic version of Christianity the official state religion.
That is wild.
Yeah, that is the exact moment Zoroaster's practical moral guide was fatally misread, twisted, and explicitly used for political gain. The state now had the ultimate justification to enforce its will.
Because they weren't just putting down political opponents anymore, they were legally eradicating evil. Here's where it gets really interesting, because it completely took on a life of its own. It totally strayed from Zoroaster's original intent to morally guide people.
Oh, completely. That weaponized version heavily soaked into the Western cultural DNA from that point forward. I mean, you see it driving the brutal logic of the Inquisition in the Middle Ages.
Right, and it fueled the Crusades.
Yeah, and it even carried over into the Enlightenment, just masking itself in secular language.
Yeah.
The tragic irony is that it completely betrayed Zoroaster's intent.
Which was just to elevate and civilize humanity, not divide it. It's astounding that brilliant thinkers over the centuries haven't managed to break us out of this loop.
Well, some certainly tried to sound the alarm. You know, Friedrich Nietzsche's famous work, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, explicitly uses the figure of Zoroaster to critique this very obsession with rigid moral absolutes.
Oh, interesting.
But despite those warnings, the misinterpretation remains deeply ingrained. When you look at modern conflicts and see them framed purely as good versus evil, you are actually looking through a distorted lens manufactured by 4th century political maneuvers.
Having heard that AI dialogue, you now understand how Zoroaster's original teachings became distorted over time. Here, I want to introduce a new concept, good-evil pluralism. We're all familiar with the term good-evil dualism, the framework that understands the world through opposing structures of good and evil, justice and wickedness, light and darkness. However, what's actually happening in contemporary international politics is an entirely different phenomenon. What we're witnessing is good-evil pluralism. Multiple actors are each claiming to be the good. America proclaims American justice, Iran declares Iranian justice, and Israel asserts Israeli justice. Ultimately, whoever wins through force becomes recorded in history as the sole good. This is the real structure, not good-evil dualism, but good-evil pluralism. Multiple versions of good compete, and the strongest emerges victorious, imposing their version of good as universal truth. Media then presents this victor's good as universal justice. The defeated party's version of good gets labeled as evil and erased from history, just like what happened to Iraq's Saddam Hussein. Let's examine this good-evil pluralism through concrete examples. First, consider America. Recall the Bush administration's war on terror. President Bush declared, "We are in the midst of a struggle between good and evil," legitimizing the concept of preemptive war. But the problems with this logic were obvious. By disregarding the United Nations and international legal frameworks, America unilaterally used military force against Iraq. This was imposing American good on other nations. The defeated Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein's version of good was branded as evil, and he was executed on December 30th, 2006. Then came Trump's populism, seizing power through the dualistic narrative of corrupt elites versus virtuous, ordinary citizens. But this, too, was another imposition of a particular good. It exploited popular discontent to systematically attack and exclude opponents as enemies. What about Europe? The EU positions itself as liberal and therefore good, while viewing the outside world as non-liberal and therefore evil. Yet behind this facade, it implements far-right exclusionary policies under a humanitarian framework, a clear contradiction. The clearest example is the double standard regarding Ukraine and Gaza. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was severely sanctioned as a clear violation of international law. However, Israel's attacks on Gaza received no equivalent criticism or sanctions. This reveals the reality of Western good. Currently, American good, European good, Global South good, Israeli good, and Iranian good all coexist. This is the reality of good-evil pluralism. So, why does this pluralistic reality get disguised as dualism? We need to analyze this through 3 layers. Layer 1. Geopolitical structural requirements. Most importantly, alliance relationships have geopolitical necessity. Collective defense systems like NATO Article 5 and the US-Japan Security Treaty require the existence of a clear enemy as a precondition. Without a common enemy, alliance legitimacy collapses. America needs to stage common threats to bind its allies together. China has its geopolitical rationality, and Russia has its historical necessity. But acknowledging these truths would eliminate the reason for alliances to exist. This is why the axis of evil versus liberal democracy, dualism, must be maintained. Layer 2. Cognitive scientific limitations. Human brains have physical limitations. We can only process about 7 ± 2 elements simultaneously. Simple dualism is cognitively easier than complex pluralism. Furthermore, we've inherited evolutionary thinking patterns from our hunter-gatherer past, in-group versus out-group mentality. Under stress, we regress to this primitive thinking. Layer 3. Artificial manipulation technologies. Technologies have developed to exploit these cognitive vulnerabilities. World War II psychological warfare research was later applied to advertising and political consulting, the scientification of media manipulation. Today, this appears in social media. Social media algorithms promote extremism through engagement prioritization, while echo chamber effects make complete information control technically possible. The key point is that these factors interact. Structural necessity and artificial manipulation combine to create an environment where good-evil pluralism, reality gets disguised as good-evil dualism. Finally, why do Japanese people particularly sense this disconnect? Our Japanese ancestors were largely unrelated to Zoroastrian influence after the Babylonian captivity and subsequent Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. We remained relatively free from 3,000 years of good-evil dualism, historical conditioning. For Japanese people, good and evil relate to whether actions align with moral principles, not whether they oppose some external enemy. We don't brand others as evil. Everyone has both good and evil aspects, which is why moral cultivation and self-improvement are necessary. The phrase extreme wickedness and immorality, Goku Kaido, symbolizes this thinking. This positioning allows us to observe good-evil pluralism, reality, more objectively. However, we face a problem. As long as Japan depends on the US-Japan alliance, escaping this structure remains difficult. Despite holding different internal values, we must follow America's version of good. Can Japan break free from this alliance dependency? Actually, technological innovation presents new possibilities. Nuclear fusion energy combined with laser defense technology might offer Japan completely new strategic options. I'll explore this in detail next week. What did you think of today's video? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your likes and comments really encourage me. Until next week, this is QB signing off.